right now, something is happening in the financial world that most people are completely missing. And the few who are paying attention are starting to connect the dots in a very serious way. The signs are everywhere, the signals are becoming stronger, and yet the majority of retail investors are still confused, still distracted, and still looking in the wrong direction. What if the answer has been right in front of everyone this whole time, but only a small group truly understands it? What if the system is quietly preparing for a shift and one digital asset is sitting at the center of that transformation? And here is the most important part. What if that asset is not just another cryptocurrency, but something designed for a much bigger role in the global financial system? This is where things start to get interesting because when you look at all the pieces together, one name keeps coming up again and again, and it is becoming harder to ignore. It is obvious XRP. When people first enter the crypto space, they usually focus on hype, price predictions, and fast profits, and that is where most of them get stuck. They chase trends, they follow noise, and they miss the deeper purpose behind certain assets. XRP has always been different, not because of hype, but because of its use case, its connections, and its long term vision. While other cryptocurrencies focus on decentralization in a broad sense, XRP focuses on solving a very specific and very real problem, and that is global payments. This is not a small problem. This is a multi-trillion-dollar industry that runs the world behind the scenes, and it is slow, expensive, and outdated. Think about how money moves across borders today. Banks rely on systems that were built decades ago. Transactions take time, fees are high, and there is a lot of inefficiency. This is where XRP enters the picture, offering a solution that is fast, cost effective, and scalable. But here is the part that many people overlook. XRP is not just about speed or low fees, it is about liquidity. It is about acting as a bridge between different currencies, allowing value to move seamlessly across the globe without the need for pre funded accounts. This is a major shift. And if adopted at a large scale, it can completely change how money flows around the world. Now, here is where the conversation becomes even more important because if XRP is solving such a big problem, then the question is not whether it has value, but how much value it can capture over time. This is where many retail investors make a mistake. They look at the current price and assume that it reflects the true potential, but in reality, the current price is often disconnected from future utility. Markets take time to recognize value, especially when the change involves large institutions and global systems. There is also another layer to this, and it involves regulation. For a long time, uncertainty around regulation has held XRP back, creating fear and hesitation in the market. But at the same time, this process has also been shaping XRP into one of the most compliant and institution ready digital assets. While others operate in unclear legal territory, XRP has been going through challenges that could ultimately position it as one of the safest options for large scale adoption. This is something that long term thinkers are paying close attention to because once clarity comes, the landscape can change very quickly. Another thing to understand is that institutions do not move based on hype, they move based on efficiency, cost savings, and reliability. If a system like XRP can provide real benefits in these areas, then it becomes very attractive, not because of speculation, but because of necessity. And when institutions start to adopt something out of necessity, that is when real momentum begins. This is not about overnight gains. This is about gradual integration into the backbone of the financial system. At the same time, retail investors often underestimate how early they actually are. It may feel like XRP has been around for a long time, but in terms of global adoption, things are still in the early stages. Major financial shifts do not happen overnight. They take years of development, testing, and gradual implementation. During this period, there is usually a disconnect between perception and reality, and that creates opportunity for those who are willing to look beyond the surface. So when someone says it is obvious XRP, it is not just a statement, it reflects a deeper understanding of what is happening behind the scenes. It reflects the idea that when you connect the dots between technology, use case, regulation, and institutional interest, the picture becomes much clearer. The question then becomes, are people willing to take the time to understand it, or will they continue to follow noise and miss the bigger opportunity? Because as we move forward, the signals are not slowing down, they are becoming stronger, and the gap between those who understand and those who do not is starting to widen. And this is exactly where the next phase begins, where awareness starts turning into action and where the market begins to respond in ways that many are not prepared for. As the conversation moves forward, it becomes very important to understand why the idea that it is obvious XRP is not just based on belief or emotion, but on a pattern that is slowly becoming visible to those who are paying close attention. When you step back and look at how global finance is evolving, you begin to notice that the current system is under pressure, and not just from crypto, but from the need for efficiency, transparency, and speed. Governments, banks, and financial institutions are all exploring ways to upgrade the system, and this is not happening in isolation. It is happening at the same time across multiple regions. Now, here is where things start to connect in a more serious way, because while many cryptocurrencies are trying to replace the system, XRP is designed to work with it. This is a key difference that most people do not fully understand at the beginning. Instead of fighting against banks and institutions, XRP is positioned as a tool that can improve how they operate. This creates a completely different path for adoption, one that is less about disruption and more about integration. And when you are talking about global finance, integration often moves faster than complete replacement. At the same time, financial institutions are not experimenting randomly, they are testing technologies that can solve real problems. Cross border payments remain one of the biggest challenges. And even today, transferring money from one country to another can take days, involve multiple intermediaries, and include high costs. This is not just inconvenient, it is inefficient on a massive scale. XRP's ability to settle transactions in seconds while reducing costs is not just an improvement, it is a transformation of the process. But there is another layer that makes this even more important, and that is liquidity management. Banks currently need to hold large amounts of money in different countries to facilitate transactions, and this ties up capital that could be used elsewhere. XRP introduces a different model where liquidity can be sourced on demand, removing the need for pre funded accounts. This may sound simple, but in reality, it can unlock huge amounts of capital across the financial system. And when institutions see an opportunity to free up capital while improving efficiency, they pay attention. Now, let's look at the timing, because timing plays a very important role in understanding where we are right now. Over the past few years, there has been a lot of uncertainty in the crypto space, especially around regulation. This has created hesitation, not just among retail investors, but also among institutions. However, this phase of uncertainty is not permanent, it is part of the process. As regulations become clearer, the environment becomes safer for larger players to enter. And when that happens, the shift can be very fast because institutions do not move slowly. Once they have clarity, they move with scale. Another important point that often gets overlooked is that adoption does not always happen in a way that is visible to the public at first. A lot of the groundwork is done quietly through partnerships, testing, and infrastructure development. By the time the public fully realizes what is happening, much of the foundation is already in place. This is why some people say that by the time it feels obvious to everyone, the biggest opportunity may already be gone. Right now, we are in that phase where signals are visible but not fully recognized by the majority. There is also a psychological factor involved because many people struggle to believe that something they can still buy at a relatively low price could play such a big role in the future. They assume that if it were truly that important, the price would already reflect it. But history shows that markets often lag behind real world developments, especially when those developments involve complex systems like global finance. It takes time for understanding to spread, and during that time, there is often a gap between value and price. At the same time, it is important to remain realistic and balanced. XRP is not the only project in the space, and competition does exist. However, what makes XRP stand out is its focus, its track record, and its alignment with institutional needs. While others are still trying to define their role, XRP has been consistently working towards a clear objective, and that consistency matters over the long term. As more people begin to look beyond short term price movements and start focusing on utility, the conversation naturally shifts. It becomes less about speculation and more about real world impact. And this is where the idea that it is obvious XRP starts to make more sense because it is not about hype. It is about connecting real problems with real solutions. Moving forward, the next phase becomes even more critical because this is where awareness begins to spread more widely and where the market starts reacting not just to speculation, but to actual progress. And when that transition happens, it often catches people off guard, especially those who were waiting for perfect confirmation before taking things seriously. As we go deeper into this discussion, the focus now shifts to something that many people underestimate, and that is how markets actually react when real utility begins to meet real demand. Up to this point, a large part of the crypto market has been driven by speculation, emotion, and short term thinking. But that phase does not last forever. At some stage, utility starts to take control. And when that happens, the assets that solve real problems begin to separate themselves from the rest. This is where the entire conversation around XRP becomes even more important because its role is directly connected to a real and existing global need. Now, think about how value is determined in any market. It is not just about popularity, it is about how much demand exists for a specific function and how limited the supply is that can fulfill that function. In the case of XRP, the function is clear. It is about providing liquidity and enabling fast, efficient cross border transactions. If this function begins to be used at a large scale, then demand is no longer based on retail interest alone. It starts coming from institutions, payment providers, and financial systems that require this utility to operate more efficiently. And when demand shifts from optional to necessary, the impact on value can be very different. Another important factor to understand is that global financial systems operate on massive volumes. We are not talking about small transactions. We are talking about trillions of dollars moving across borders regularly. If even a small percentage of that volume starts flowing through a system that uses XRP as a bridge, the demand for liquidity increases significantly. This is where the concept becomes very simple but very powerful. More usage creates more demand, and more demand combined with a fixed supply creates pressure on price over time. This is not about hype cycles. This is about basic market dynamics. At the same time, many people make the mistake of thinking that adoption will happen all at once. But in reality, it happens in stages. First, there is testing and experimentation. Then there is limited use, and only after that comes wider adoption. Each stage builds on the previous one, and during this process, the market may not immediately reflect what is happening behind the scenes. This is why patience becomes very important because those who expect instant results often miss the bigger picture. There is also a shift happening in how institutions approach digital assets. In the past, there was a lot of skepticism and hesitation, but now there is growing interest in finding practical applications. This is not about chasing trends, it is about improving existing systems. XRP fits into this approach because it is designed to work within the financial structure rather than against it. This makes it easier for institutions to consider using it because it does not require a complete change in how they operate. It simply improves efficiency. Now, let's talk about perception because perception plays a big role in how markets behave. For a long time, XRP has been misunderstood and, in some cases, underestimated. This has created a situation where its potential is not fully priced in. While some see this as a weakness, others see it as an opportunity. When an asset is not fully understood, it often remains undervalued until a clear narrative begins to form. Once that narrative becomes widely accepted, the adjustment in price can happen quickly. Another key point is that large players do not enter markets in the same way as retail investors. They do not chase price spikes and they do not react to short term noise. Instead, they build positions over time, often in ways that are not immediately visible. This means that by the time the general public becomes aware of what is happening, a significant amount of positioning may already be complete. This is why understanding the underlying trends becomes more important than reacting to daily price movements. At the same time, it is important to recognize that markets are not always rational in the short term. There will be periods of doubt, volatility, and uncertainty. Prices may move in ways that do not seem to match the fundamentals, and this can create confusion. However, over the long term, fundamentals tend to play a bigger role. If XRP continues to move towards real world use and adoption, then the long term direction becomes more aligned with its utility. This brings us back to the main idea. The reason why some people say it is obvious XRP is because when you combine all these factors, the picture starts to become clearer. It is not about predicting the future with certainty. It is about recognizing patterns, understanding utility, and seeing where the financial system is heading. Those who take the time to connect these points often arrive at the same conclusion, even if they started from different perspectives. And as we move into the next phase, the focus shifts even further because this is where the gap between awareness and action begins to close. More people start paying attention, more discussions begin to take place, and the momentum slowly starts to build. This is the stage where things can accelerate, not in a sudden explosion, but in a steady and powerful way that becomes harder and harder to ignore. As the discussion continues to move forward, the focus now shifts to a stage that many people underestimate, and that is the transition from quiet development to visible momentum. This is the phase where everything that has been building in the background slowly starts to show itself on the surface. And this is also the stage where the market begins to react in a more noticeable way. Up until now, a lot of the progress around XRP has been happening without full public attention, but that does not mean it has not been significant. In fact, this is how major financial changes usually happen. They start quietly, they build slowly, and then they begin to accelerate once the foundation is strong enough. Now, here is something very important to understand. Momentum in financial markets does not begin when everyone agrees. It begins when a small but informed group starts to act based on what they see coming. At first, this movement is not obvious, and it may even go against the general sentiment in the market. But as more signals start to align, more participants begin to notice, and this is when momentum starts to grow. In the case of XRP, this stage is closely tied to increasing clarity, growing confidence, and expanding use cases. Another key factor that plays a role here is network effect. When a system starts to be used by more participants, its value increases not just because of demand, but because of its usefulness within the network. If more financial institutions begin to explore or adopt systems connected to XRP, then each new participant adds to the overall strength of that network. This creates a cycle where adoption leads to more adoption, and over time, this can create a very strong position in the market. At the same time, there is a shift happening in how people view digital assets. The early phase of crypto was dominated by speculation, fast gains, and short term thinking, but that phase is slowly evolving. More attention is now being given to real world applications, efficiency, and long term sustainability. This shift does not happen overnight, but once it gains traction, it changes how value is assigned in the market. Assets that can demonstrate real utility begin to stand out more clearly, and this is where XRP continues to position itself. Now, let's talk about something that often creates confusion, and that is price movement during this stage. Many people expect that once something is strong fundamentally, the price should immediately reflect that strength, but markets do not always work that way. There can be delays, there can be periods of sideways movement, and there can even be temporary drops. This is because markets are influenced by many factors, including sentiment, liquidity, and external events. However, underneath all of that, the fundamental direction can still remain intact. There is also the role of information flow because not everyone receives or understands information at the same time. Some people are early, some are late, and some ignore the signals completely. This creates waves of awareness in the market where one group starts acting before another. As these waves build on each other, momentum increases. By the time the majority becomes fully aware, the movement is already well underway. This is why timing is not just about being early, it is about being informed at the right stage. Another important element in this phase is confidence. Confidence does not come from hype, it comes from consistency and progress. As XRP continues to demonstrate its capabilities and as more clarity develops around its position, confidence begins to grow among different types of participants. This includes not just retail investors, but also institutions, developers, and financial entities. When confidence spreads across multiple levels, it creates a stronger and more stable form of momentum. At the same time, it is important to remain grounded because no market moves in a straight line. There will always be challenges, setbacks, and moments of doubt. But these moments are often part of the process rather than a sign of failure. In fact, they can serve as tests that strengthen the overall structure before the next phase of growth. Understanding this helps in maintaining a long term perspective instead of reacting to short term changes. This brings everything back to the central idea once again. When people say it is obvious XRP, they are not just reacting to a single event or a short term trend. They are observing a combination of factors that are aligning over time. These include utility, adoption potential, institutional interest, and the gradual shift in how the market values real world solutions. When all of these elements start moving in the same direction, the overall picture becomes much clearer. And now, as we approach the final stage of this breakdown, the focus moves towards what all of this means for the average participant in the market. Because understanding is one thing, but knowing how to respond to that understanding is another. This is where decisions are made, where strategies are formed, and where the difference between reacting and preparing becomes very important. As everything comes together, the most important question is no longer just about understanding XRP, but about what that understanding actually means in terms of action, mindset, and long term positioning. Because at this stage, information alone is not enough. What matters is how that information is used. Many people reach a point where they start to see the bigger picture. They begin to understand the role XRP could play, and they recognize the direction in which the financial system is moving. But even then, hesitation, doubt, and overthinking can still hold them back. This is where clarity becomes important, not just in knowledge, but in decision making. Now, think about this carefully. Every major opportunity in financial markets comes with uncertainty, and that uncertainty is exactly what keeps the opportunity alive. If everything were completely clear, if everyone fully agreed, and if there was no risk at all, then the opportunity would no longer exist in the same way. By the time something feels completely safe and obvious to everyone, most of the upside is usually already gone. This is not just true for XRP, this is true for markets in general. The early stages always feel uncomfortable, and that discomfort is what separates those who prepare early from those who react late. At the same time, it is very important to approach this space with balance and discipline. Believing in the long term potential of something does not mean ignoring risks or acting without a plan. Smart participants always think in terms of strategy, they manage their exposure, they stay informed, and they avoid emotional decisions. XRP may present a strong case based on its utility and positioning, but like any asset, it is still part of a market that can be unpredictable in the short term. This is why patience and risk management are just as important as conviction. Another key point to understand is that not everyone will have the same approach, and that is completely normal. Some people will choose to take a long term position and hold through different market cycles, while others may focus on shorter term movements. What matters is not which approach is chosen, but whether it is based on understanding rather than impulse. When decisions are made with clarity, they are more likely to remain consistent even during periods of volatility. There is also the factor of timing, and this is where many people struggle the most. They wait for the perfect moment, the perfect confirmation, or the perfect signal, but markets rarely offer perfect conditions. Instead, they move in phases, and each phase presents a different type of opportunity. Right now, the phase we are discussing is one of growing awareness and early positioning. It is not the beginning, but it is also not the end. And this middle stage is often where the biggest decisions are made, even if they do not feel urgent at the time. At the same time, it is important to stay aware of the noise in the market. There will always be conflicting opinions, bold predictions, and emotional reactions. Some will say XRP is going to massive levels very quickly, while others will dismiss it completely. But neither extreme provides a complete picture. The real understanding comes from looking at fundamentals, tracking progress, and staying focused on long term trends rather than short term distractions. This is what allows someone to remain steady while others are constantly reacting. Now, bringing everything back together, the idea that it is obvious XRP is not about blind belief or hype. It is about connecting multiple layers of information in a logical way. It is about seeing how a global problem exists, how a solution is being developed, how institutions may benefit from that solution, and how the market could eventually respond to that shift. When all of these elements are viewed together, the conclusion starts to feel less like speculation and more like a structured possibility. As the market continues to evolve, the gap between understanding and action will continue to play a major role. Some people will recognize the signals early and position themselves accordingly, while others will wait until everything becomes widely accepted. And both choices come with their own outcomes. The key is not to follow others blindly, but to build a clear perspective and act based on that perspective with patience and discipline. Before ending, it is important to keep one thing very clear. This content is for informational and educational purposes only and should not be considered financial advice. The cryptocurrency market is highly volatile and prices can move up or down at any time. Always do your own research, understand your financial situation, and never invest money that you cannot afford to lose. Making informed decisions and managing risk properly is always more important than chasing quick gains. If you found this breakdown helpful, make sure to like, share, and subscribe for more content that simplifies complex ideas into clear and practical insights.